Some rescue stories don't end with a hug. They end with a door opening, and your heart breaking a little as you let go. One night, an infrared trail camera on the edge of a Montana ranch captured something nobody could explain. A grown bobcat returning, walking beside two giant Great Pyrenees like a quiet patrol. Megan went cold because that bobcat had been released to forget people. So why was he back? And what he did next left even the wildlife team speechless. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The night the footage arrived, the sky over the Gallatin Range looked like dark felt pulled tight across the mountains, with a thin wash of moonlight turning the snowfields a dull pewter. Megan Caldwell was at her kitchen table, the kind with worn edges and a faint smell of brewed coffee that never quite leaves the grain. Outside, the wind tapped the windows in small, impatient clicks, and the old heater in the hallway sighed like it was tired too. Her Great Pyrenees, Atlas, lay stretched across the floorboards near the door, all white fur and slow breathing, the steady sound of a guardian who had spent years listening for trouble. Megan's phone buzzed once, then again. A new message from Dr. Evan Hart at Bridger Wildlife Rehab. No pleasantries, just a line. Trail cam pulled something you need to see. Call when you can. She didn't call right away. She opened the attachment because curiosity has a way of beating caution when your heart is already carrying unfinished questions. The video loaded grainy and green, that familiar infrared glow where everything looks like a memory. The timestamp sat in the corner like a quiet accusation. The camera was set near the fence line at the edge of her pasture, where the trees begin and the world turns wild. The microphone caught the thin hiss of wind moving through needles, and somewhere far off, so faint she almost missed it, a single coyote yip. Then the first shape slid into frame, low to the ground, compact. A cat's body, not a dog's. The eyes flashed bright for one heartbeat as it angled its face toward the lens. Megan felt her scalp tighten, the way it does when you recognize something you weren't expecting to see again. The bobcat moved with that smooth, silent confidence that belongs to animals who don't have to ask permission from the dark. But what came next made Megan's breath lock in her throat. Two huge shadows followed, broad-chested and ghost-pale under infrared, moving like silent boulders with fur. Great Pyrenees. Not strays, not coyotes, not wolves. Pyrenees, walking shoulder to shoulder with the bobcat like it was the most natural thing in the world. They didn't chase it. They didn't circle it. They didn't posture. They matched its pace, steady and calm, as if they'd been assigned the same job. Megan's fingers went cold around the phone. She could hear Atlas's collar tag faintly clink when he lifted his head. He stared at the screen, then looked up at her with the kind of knowing that made her chest ache. The bobcat paused at the very edge of the fence, close enough that Megan could see the shape of its ears and the faint bars along its legs, and then it did something that made her stomach drop. It turned toward the pasture, toward the house, not like a hungry animal drifting toward lights, but like someone checking a place that mattered. Megan whispered without meaning to, "No, you can't be here." Because if that was who she thought it was, then every rule they'd followed, every careful day of distance and silence, every painful decision meant to keep a wild animal wild, had failed. Or worse, something had happened out there that was forcing it back. The bobcat took 3 slow steps along the fence line. The Pyrenees stayed with it, a pale wall on either side, and then the bobcat lowered its head and scraped at the ground. Not frantically, not digging for food. 3 deliberate rakes of dirt, like a signal. The sound in the video was soft, almost lost under the wind, but Megan's ears filled it in anyway. The dry scratch of frozen soil, the tiny grit against claw. Atlas rose to his feet in the kitchen, silent as falling snow. His body went rigid, his nose lifting toward the door, as if he could smell the past through wood and glass. Megan's throat tightened until she tasted metal. She hadn't heard that scratch in years, not since the months when her house had become a place she still didn't know how to explain to anyone, without sounding foolish or cruel. The video ended. The screen went black. Megan sat there with the phone still glowing in her hand, her pulse loud in her ears, and the whole kitchen seemed to tilt slightly, as if the world had shifted a fraction to the left. This was the moment she had dreaded and secretly wondered about. The moment that makes people argue in comments and shake their heads at the news. The moment when a rescue story stops being sweet and starts being complicated. She had worked hard to keep her life simple, paying the bills on time, keeping the goats healthy, maintaining the fence, comparing affordable home insurance rates when storms rolled in, shopping for the best pet food deals without wasting money, and budgeting every month like a prayer. Out here, you learn fast that peace is built from ordinary choices. And yet one silent clip had just pulled her back to the edge of the woods where ordinary rules don't always hold. Megan finally stood and walked to the window. The glass was cold against her fingertips. Outside, the yard was quiet, washed in pale moonlight. The fence line was empty. No bobcat, no shadows. Only the faint shimmer of snow and the deep black cut of the forest beyond. Atlas pressed his shoulder against her leg, a warm weight that steadied her. Megan swallowed, tasting coffee gone bitter on her tongue, and she made a decision that felt like stepping onto thin ice. She was going to call Dr. Hart, and whatever that bobcat had come back to, say whatever it had learned living beside giants, she was going to listen. Earlier that spring, before the trail camera ever had a chance to haunt her, Megan remembered a different kind of night, one that smelled of wet dirt and old timber, the kind of cold rain that seeps through your coat and settles in your bones. The wind kept changing direction, pushing the sound of the creek up the valley and then taking it away again. She'd been finishing the last round at the goat shed, checking latches by the beam of a flashlight, when Atlas suddenly stopped walking. He didn't bark. That alone made her pay attention. Atlas's ears tilted forward and his whole body went still, white fur darkening in patches where rain had soaked through. June and Bramble hovered behind him, a quiet wall of muscle and patience. Megan paused, listening. At first, she heard only the drip of water off the roof and the distant rattle of a loose hinge. Then, faint as a breath, came a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A thin, rasping cry. It was so small she almost thought it was a bird caught under the eaves, until it came again, lower, rougher, like something trying to call and failing. Megan followed the sound toward the old equipment bay, where a rusted gutter fed into a cracked drain pipe. Water ran there in a steady ribbon, cold and metallic, disappearing into a dark hole beneath the concrete lip. Atlas stepped in front of her, not blocking her with fear, but with something protective, as if he already knew what she was about to see. Megan crouched and aimed the light into the opening. The beam caught mud, broken grass, and a collapse where the soil had given way. The smell rose sharp and sour, wet earth mixed with the faint musk of an animal den. And there, pressed against the mud like a scrap of tawny fur, was a bobcat kitten. Its eyes were sealed shut, its ribs fluttered fast under thin skin. One paw twitched weakly, scraping at nothing, and Megan's stomach tightened so hard she felt sick. She scanned the edges, expecting a mother to explode out of the dark, but the only movement was rainwater sliding down and pooling in the hollow. Something had happened here, something final. The den had caved in. The storm had done the rest. Behind her, June let out a low, worried huff. Bramble's nails clicked once on the concrete as he shifted his weight. Atlas didn't move at all. He simply watched, steady, as if he'd decided this tiny life was under his guard now. Megan slipped off her glove. The kitten's fur felt damp and gritty, colder than it should have been, and light, too light, like holding a handful of feathers. When she lifted it, the kitten made a small choking sound, then went quiet again. Megan's throat burned and she realized she was holding her breath. That's when she noticed headlights. Across the lower road, half hidden by the rain, a vehicle sat with its lights off, parked longer than a neighbor should. Megan couldn't see the driver's face through the wet windshield, only the faint outline of a head and the glow of a phone screen. The hair on her arms rose under her sleeves. She told herself it was nothing, someone lost, someone checking a map, but the feeling wouldn't leave. Out here, you learn to trust the part of you that tightens before your mind catches up. She tucked the kitten inside her jacket, letting her own body heat do what it could, and hurried back toward the house. The dogs followed close, their paws making soft, heavy thumps on the wet ground. Inside, the kitchen smelled like soap and coffee grounds, warm compared to the night, and Megan set the tiny creature on a towel near the vent, watching for the smallest rise and fall of breath. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, already thinking about costs the way adults always do. Vet bills, emergency care, the same practical worries that make you compare auto insurance quotes or talk to a financial advisor when life throws a surprise you didn't budget for. But the thought that mattered most wasn't money. It was time. Megan dialed Dr. Evan Hart at Bridger Wildlife Rehab, and when he answered, her voice came out hoarse and urgent. "I found a bobcat kitten," she said. "It's alive, barely. I'm coming, KHSA-5." Outside, the rain kept falling, and somewhere down the road, that parked car rolled away without a sound. By the time Megan reached Bridger Wildlife Rehab, the rain had turned to a thin, needling sleet that rattled against the windshield like handfuls of dry rice. The road lights were smeared into long yellow strokes, and her wipers kept time with her heartbeat, fast, uneven, impatient. The kitten was tucked inside her jacket, pressed against her ribs, and every few seconds she checked with 2 fingers for the faintest flutter of breath. Atlas rode in the back, quiet as a shadow, his big head resting near the kennel gate, eyes fixed on Megan as if he could hold her steady through sheer will. Inside the rehab building, the air hit her like a wall, warm, antiseptic, and sharp with the smell of rubbing alcohol and clean towels. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the kind of hum you don't notice until you're exhausted, and then it feels like it's inside your teeth. A front desk clock ticked too loudly. Somewhere down the hall, a dog whined once and then stopped. Megan's wet sleeves clung cold to her wrists as she set the kitten gently into a gloved pair of hands. Dr. Evan Hart moved with the calm speed of someone who had seen too much panic and decided long ago not to add to it. He was in scrubs, hair damp at the edges, glasses fogging as he leaned in. "Let's get heat on him," he said, voice low and steady. He didn't waste time with soft words. He didn't need to. The softness was in his hands. They placed the kitten on a warming pad, wrapped in a towel that smelled faintly of bleach and lavender detergent. A tech shaved a tiny patch of fur, and Megan winced at the sound of the clippers, harsh and buzzing in the quiet room. A thin needle slid under the skin for fluids, and the kitten flinched once, then went still. Megan's stomach rolled. She hated how fragile it looked, like something the world could erase with one careless moment. Dr. Hart glanced up at her. "How long was he exposed?" "I don't know," Megan admitted, her voice scraping. "He was under a drain pipe. Cold. Mud. I think the den collapsed." Dr. Hart's mouth tightened. "Singleton," he murmured, almost to himself. "That makes it harder." Megan swallowed. Her tongue tasted like old coffee and worry. Through the window she could see Atlas pacing in the entryway, white fur beaded with melting sleet. The sight of him, solid, patient, kept Megan from shaking apart. They worked in brisk, practiced motions. Warm fluids, oxygen, a drop of formula touched to the kitten's mouth. The room was full of small sounds, plastic crinkling, a syringe plunger, the soft beep of a monitor that felt like the only proof time was still moving forward. Minutes stretched until they didn't feel like minutes anymore. Then the kitten's mouth opened and closed around the dropper with a weak, stubborn pull. Megan's eyes stung. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, and it came out shaky, almost like a laugh that didn't know how to be happy yet. Dr. Hart leaned back slightly and studied the kitten's face. "He's not out of the woods," he said, "but he's fighting." Megan nodded, wiping at her cheek with the back of her hand. The warmth of the room was finally reaching her fingers. For the first time since the drainpipe, she felt her shoulders drop an inch. That's when Dr. Hart's tone changed. Still gentle, but edged with the kind of truth adults don't like to hear. "If he makes it," he said, "you have to understand what comes next. A bobcat raised around people or pets can get habituated. That's not cute. That's dangerous. It can mean he walks up to the wrong porch, the wrong barn, the wrong road. And then someone shoots him thinking they're protecting their livestock." Megan's throat tightened again. Out here, she knew how quickly fear turned into a rifle shot. She also knew how quickly bills stacked up when life went sideways. Emergency vet care, medical bills, the kind of surprise expenses that make older folks start comparing pet insurance plans or reviewing homeowners' insurance coverage late at night, hoping practicality can protect what the heart can't. "I can foster," Megan said softly. "If you'll allow it, I'll follow your rules." Dr. Hart watched her for a long moment, as if weighing her sincerity the way he weighed dosages. Then he nodded once. "Short term, strict protocol, minimal contact, and we keep him wild, even while we keep him alive." A tech set the kitten into a small incubator, the light inside warm and amber, like a tiny sunrise in a box. Megan leaned in close enough to see the fine whiskers trembling with each breath. The kitten's eyes were still sealed, but its paws flexed, tiny claws catching the towel like it wanted to hold on. Dr. Hart asked, "What are you going to call him?" Megan hesitated, thinking of the storm, the mud, the quiet strength of Atlas behind her. "Rook," she said at last, a name that sounded like survival. A name that sounded like a piece on a chessboard that moves in straight lines, guarding what matters. As she carried the incubator toward the door, Atlas lifted his head and let out a low, rumbling breath. Not a bark, not a growl, something deeper. Megan felt it in her chest like distant thunder. And in that moment, as if sensing the weight of the big white dog waiting outside, the tiny bobcat inside the warm box shifted closer to the glass, searching for the safest heartbeat in the room. The first weeks at Megan's ranch were measured in quiet routines and small alarms. Rook lived in a spare room off the mudroom where the light came in soft and gray through a single window, and the air always carried the faint scent of hay, leather, and clean laundry. Megan kept a space heater running low, the kind that clicks when it cycles on and off, and she kept the door shut the way Dr. Hart instructed. No unnecessary traffic, no visitors, no "look how cute" moments. She told herself she was strong enough to do it right. But a living thing has a way of reaching for warmth, and Rook was living. On the 10th day after he opened his eyes, they were a cloudy blue-gray, like spring ice on the creek. He didn't look at Megan the way a kitten looks at its person. He looked past her, toward the hall, where Atlas's breathing drifted through the cracks in the door like slow ocean waves. When Megan set a bottle down, Rook drank, then pressed his tiny forehead against the towel, searching. It was instinct, simple as hunger, and it tugged at Megan's heart in a way she didn't like to admit. Atlas made it worse, because Atlas made it gentler. The big Great Pyrenees stationed himself outside the mudroom door as if it were his post. He didn't scratch. He didn't whine. He just lay there, white fur spread across the floorboards, eyes half closed, ears tuned to every sound. June and Bramble rotated behind him, calm sentries in the hallway. Sometimes, when the house was still, Megan would hear a soft thump, Atlas's tail once against the floor, like a quiet promise that he was there. Rook began to sleep deeper on the nights Atlas was closest. Megan noticed it in the smallest ways. The kitten's shoulders relaxing, his paws uncurling, his breathing finally slowing from frantic to steady. She hated how much that comfort meant, because comfort was the first step toward attachment, and attachment was the first step toward tragedy. As the weeks passed, Rook grew into himself. His legs lengthened, his ears sharpened into little triangles. That caught every whisper of sound. His coat took on a richer tawny color, streaked with dark bars like brush strokes. He learned the rhythm of the ranch, the metallic clank of the goat gate, the soft bleat of hungry does, the dull thud of feed buckets, the low hum of the fridge at midnight. Megan found herself noticing colors more. How the morning light turned the pasture pale gold, how dusk painted the tree line purple-blue, how Atlas's fur looked almost silver when frost settled in. And then came the first moment that made her laugh out loud, just once, surprised. Megan was in the yard when Atlas dropped into his slow, playful bow to coax June into a chase. Rook, still small enough to fit under the kitchen chair, watched from the porch. He hesitated, then lowered his front end too, awkward, off balance, but unmistakable, a bobcat trying to speak dog. Atlas froze as if he couldn't believe his eyes. Then he wagged once, solemn as a judge, granting a pardon. Megan's laughter caught in her throat. She wanted to call Dr. Hart and tell him how miraculous it was. She also wanted to hide it, because miracles can turn into evidence against you. The ranch, however, did not care about her private fears. Life pressed on with its own deadlines. Bills came, repairs came, the tractor needed service. Megan spent one evening at the table sorting paperwork, the sharp smell of ink and dusty envelopes rising as she compared a farm equipment loan offer she didn't want to take. She'd always been careful, kept her credit solid, avoided debt when she could, watched interest rates the way other people watched weather. Still, she could feel that familiar adult pressure building behind her eyes. The constant balancing act of property taxes, livestock costs, and the kind of practical planning that makes people research Medicare supplements or long-term care options before they're forced to. Then the knock came. It was mid-afternoon, bright but cold with the sun glaring off patches of snow. Megan opened the door to find Officer Rachel Kim standing on the porch, rain jacket zipped, cheeks pink from the wind. Her expression was polite, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the yard, the fence line, the goat shed. "Megan Caldwell?" Rachel asked. "Yes. I'm with County Animal Control," Rachel said. "We received a report about a wild animal being housed on this property." Megan felt her stomach drop, as if the floor shifted under her boots. The air suddenly seemed louder, the distant bleating of goats, the creak of the porch step, the soft jingle of Atlas's collar as he came to stand at Megan's side. Atlas didn't growl. He simply stood there, huge and silent, like a white mountain. "It's a rehab foster," Megan said carefully. "Licensed, coordinated through Bridger Wildlife Rehab, Dr. Evan Hart." Rachel nodded, but she didn't relax. "I'm not here to make your life hard," she said. "I'm here because this is how. Accidents happen. A habituated bobcat doesn't stay in the woods. It walks up to someone's barn, someone's porch, someone's small dog, and then the ending is ugly for everyone. The words hit Megan like cold water. She could almost see it. Headlines, angry neighbors, a rifle shot in a quiet valley. The thought made her hands go numb. Rachel glanced toward the mudroom door. "I'll need to see your paperwork," she said, "and I'll need to know the plan, because if this animal becomes a public safety risk, you won't get to decide what happens next." Megan's mouth went dry. Inside the house, behind that closed door, Rook was making tiny sounds in his sleep, soft, contented chirrs that no one else could hear. And Megan realized with a sudden sharp clarity that love alone wasn't going to protect him, not from the wild and not from people. The call from Dr. Hart came 3 days after Officer Rachel Kim left Megan's porch. It was early, the kind of morning when the sky is a pale wash and the frost makes the pasture look dusted with sugar. Megan was pouring feed when her phone buzzed and she felt that small jolt of dread before she even answered, as if her body already knew the news would be heavy. "Megan," Dr. Hart said, skipping greetings. His voice held that clipped seriousness that meant there was no easy option. "We just took in an adult female bobcat. Illegal trap, deep bruising. She's wild, fully wild, and she's coming unglued in captivity. I need a calm, controlled space, and I need it fast." Megan's hand tightened around the phone. She glanced toward the house, where Rook paced behind the mudroom door, his tail flicking in quick, impatient snaps. "An adult?" she asked. "Here?" "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't necessary, Doctor." Hart said. "Counties stretched thin. And this one, she's fighting the walls like they're killing her. She hasn't eaten since intake." The air smelled of cold metal and goat hay. Megan could hear Atlas in the yard, his slow breathing and the soft crunch of his paws on frost. She remembered Rachel Kim's warning, habituation, danger, consequences, and she felt the tension clamp down again, tight as a belt. "What's her name?" Megan asked, because naming a thing made it feel less like a crisis. "We're calling her Nova," Dr. Hart said, "because she came in like a star going supernova, bright, violent, burning herself out." By noon, Dr. Hart's truck rolled into the drive, tires whispering over gravel. A covered crate sat strapped in the bed, and even before the tailgate dropped, Megan could hear it. An ugly, frantic pounding, claws striking plastic in sharp bursts that echoed off the barn like gunshots. The sound raised the hair on her arms. It wasn't the noise of an animal asking for comfort. It was the noise of an animal trying to escape death. Atlas and June stopped at the edge of the yard, bodies stiff, ears forward. Bramble gave a low, warning huff. Dr. Hart raised a hand. "Easy," he murmured. "No sudden moves." When he lifted the crate cover, Megan caught a flash of fur through the bars, darker than Rook's with hard lines and eyes that looked like hot coins in the shade. Nova threw herself at the back of the crate, then the side, then the door, as if she could break reality by force. A raw hiss tore out of her, followed by a guttural growl that made Megan's chest vibrate. The smell hit her next. Sharp fear, musk, and blood, like pennies and wet earth. "She's been caught before," Dr. Hart said quietly, reading Megan's face. "Or she's been chased hard enough to learn humans equal pain." They set Nova up in the far equipment room of the barn, away from the house, away from the goats, dim and quiet with heavy blankets hung to soften sound. Still, Nova didn't settle. She hurled herself at the corners, slammed her shoulder against the crate, and the whole room filled with the brutal rhythm of panic. Megan's stomach twisted with helplessness. Adults learn to handle plenty: storm damage, medical bills, the whoosh and grind of keeping a property afloat. The kind of life where you compare Medicare Advantage plans or look into affordable health insurance because one bad month can tilt everything. But there was something uniquely powerless about watching a wild creature destroy itself in fear. Rook sensed it immediately. He didn't see Nova at first, but he heard her. The barn carried sound in strange ways, and that pounding traveled through the boards and into the yard like a warning drum. Rook pressed his face to the crack under the mudroom door, whiskers trembling. He made a small chirp, curious, alert, not afraid. Megan kept them separate, exactly as Dr. Hart instructed, but even distance didn't stop the atmosphere from changing. The ranch felt different with Nova there, like a thunderstorm parked just beyond the ridge. That evening, Megan noticed Dale Mercer's truck on the lower road again. Parked. Lights off. Same as the night under the drainpipe. She stood by the window with a mug of lukewarm coffee, watching the dark shape of the vehicle sit too long in the wrong place. Her skin prickled. When she stepped onto the porch, the cold slapped her cheeks and the air smelled of wood smoke and frozen grass. Dale's truck rolled forward slowly, then stopped. A phone screen lit up inside. He was filming. Megan's heart hammered. She didn't shout, she didn't wave, she simply stood there, letting Atlas step beside her like a white monument. Atlas stared down the road, silent and steady. The truck moved on, but the message felt clear. Someone was watching, collecting pieces, waiting for her to slip. Inside the barn, Nova hit the crate again, hard enough that Megan flinched. Then, as if the fight had finally burned through her, the pounding slowed. A quiet fell, broken only by the faint tick of cooling metal and the distant, sleepy bleat of goats. Megan exhaled, tasting the bitter edge of fear in her mouth. She checked the food tray, untouched. She checked the water, barely disturbed. And then she heard it. A different sound, softer. From the mudroom, Rook made a low, questioning trill, the way a cat might call into a dark room. It wasn't affection. It wasn't play. It was recognition of a kind. Megan leaned her forehead against the cold barn door for a moment, letting the chill steady her. Nova was wild, trapped inside walls. Rook was wild, growing up under the shadow of gentle giants. And somewhere out there, beyond her fence line, were people setting traps and people taking notes, and a future that was tightening around all of them. On the fourth morning, the barn smelled different. The sharp edge of fear was still there, but underneath it was something warmer: straw, damp wood, and the faint animal-sweet scent of breath that had finally slowed down. Megan stepped inside with a bowl of food and heard only quiet. Not the violent crashing from before, just the soft, irregular scrape of claws on blanket fabric, like someone shifting in sleep. Nova was still in the covered crate, but her eyes weren't blazing now. They were wide and watchful, taking in every shadow, every sound. When Megan slid the food tray in, Nova didn't lunge. She didn't hiss. She stayed still, muscles tight, and the only movement was her nose twitching as the smell reached her, rich, meaty, undeniable. Then, very slowly, she leaned forward and took one bite. The sound was small, wet, almost polite, and Megan felt her whole body loosen in relief. She didn't celebrate out loud. She just breathed, tasting cold air and gratitude, and backed away like Dr. Hart had taught her. You didn't reward a wild animal with attention. You rewarded it with space. Outside the barn, Rook was waiting at the fence line, half hidden in the shadow of Atlas's legs. His ears were tall, his eyes sharp, and his whiskers quivered, as if he could feel the change before Megan said a word. He didn't bound or beg the way a dog would. He simply watched, and that watching had a new weight to it, less playful curiosity, more calculation. In the days that followed, something began to shift between the two cats. even with the barriers and distance. Megan would step into the barn and find Nova calm. Calm in the way a tightly coiled spring is calm, until a sudden sound snapped her nerves again. But whenever Nova's breathing started to race, Megan noticed how the air outside would go strangely still, and Rook would appear near the barn door, silent as a thought. He never pressed close. He never tried to touch. He would just sit, angled slightly away, and begin to groom his paw with exaggerated slowness, as if he were telling her, without words, there is no threat here. It worked more than it should have. One afternoon, Nova stopped pacing entirely and lay down. Megan stood there, feeling the hairs on the back of her neck lift, not from fear, but from awe. For the first time, Nova looked like a bobcat again instead of a trapped storm. Dr. Hart visited that evening. The sky was clear, the kind of sharp Montana blue that makes the mountains look cut from glass. As they walked the perimeter of the barn, Megan pointed out the quiet change, the way Nova was eating now, the way she wasn't shredding herself against the crate. Dr. Hart listened, then said, "It's him." "Rook?" Megan asked, though she already knew. "Singletons are tricky," he said, "but he's still speaking the right language. He's just been bilingual." Megan glanced toward the yard where Atlas stood like a white statue and Rook moved in the grass, low and careful, stalking a drifting leaf as if it were prey. The motion was different than before, less clumsy play, more precision. Rook froze mid-step when a raven called overhead. His whole body went still, even his tail, and Megan felt a chill run through her because that stillness was pure wild. That night, Megan woke to Atlas's deep, warning breath at the bedroom door. Not a bark. A low, vibrating sound that meant trouble. She slipped on her boots and stepped outside. The air bit her face, and the stars were bright enough to hurt your eyes. Somewhere out near the tree line came a faint metallic clink, like a chain tapping rock. Megan's flashlight beam swept the ground and caught something that made her stomach drop, a narrow strip of disturbed soil, and beside it, a small, fresh drag mark. A scent, too, carried on the cold wind, sharp metal, engine oil, and something sour that didn't belong. Atlas's body was rigid. June paced once, then stopped, nose high. Bramble growled under his breath. Megan backed up slowly, heart pounding. In the dark, she saw Rook on the other side of the yard, crouched low, watching the forest with an intensity that made him look older than he was. His ears angled toward the trees, and his eyes reflected the light in a quick green flash. In the morning, Officer Rachel Kim returned. She stood near the fence line, hands in her pockets, breath fogging white. Megan showed her the disturbed ground. Rachel crouched, studied the marks, and her jaw tightened. "Someone's setting illegal traps in this valley," Rachel said quietly. "We've suspected it for months, but suspicion isn't enough. We need clear evidence, photos, a plate number, something that holds up." Megan's stomach knotted with anger and fear. She pictured Nova's bruised leg, the panic that had turned her into a battering ram. She pictured Dale Mercer's dark truck and the glow of his phone. The world suddenly felt full of watchers, some who wanted to protect, some who wanted to profit, some who simply wanted a story at any cost. That afternoon, as the sun dropped and turned the pasture a deep honey gold, Megan noticed something else. Rook was keeping his distance from her now. He didn't come to the mudroom door when she walked by. He didn't lift his face to her voice. He spent long stretches near the barn, near the edges, near the places where wind carried messages. Nova had not softened him. Nova had sharpened him. And as Megan watched him move, quiet, deliberate, listening to the land, she felt the truth settle in her chest like a stone. The question wasn't whether Rook could go back to the wild. The question was whether the wild, right now, was safe enough to take him. The first hint was the smell, faint at dawn, like a campfire someone forgot to drown out, then thicker by noon, riding the wind until it settled in Megan's hair and clung to the back of her throat. By late afternoon, the sky over the Gallatin Range had gone an odd, bruised color, the sun dulled to a copper coin behind a veil of haze. Ash drifted down in slow, lazy flecks that looked almost pretty until you remembered what they meant. Dr. Hart arrived with his truck coated in dust and urgency. He stepped out, squinting toward the ridge, and the line between his brows deepened. "Fires jumped the drainage," he said. "They're talking about closing access roads. If we're going to release, it has to be tonight or not at all. Not here." Megan's stomach tightened. Tonight felt impossible. Tomorrow felt like a gamble. She thought of the disturbed soil at the tree line, the metallic scent, the traps they couldn't prove. She thought of Nova's bruised leg and the way Rook now moved like he belonged to the shadows more than the kitchen light. She also thought of Officer Rachel Kim's calm, warning voice. Once a wild animal is too comfortable around people, the ending is rarely kind. Inside the house, Atlas stood at the window, watching the smoke-softened horizon as if he could sense trouble coming before it arrived. June and Bramble paced once, then settled, their big bodies quiet but ready. Megan found herself doing what grown-ups always do in a crisis, making lists in her head. Water for the goats, gates secured, papers in one place. The kind of practical thinking that makes you check emergency preparedness supplies, review homeowners insurance, and wonder, too late, whether your coverage includes wildfire damage or smoke remediation. She hated that her mind went there, but fear always drags money and risk into the room. They loaded Nova first. Even covered, her crate trembled with contained power, but she didn't explode the way she had at intake. She was tense, watchful, and somehow more whole. Rook's crate was lighter, quieter. Still, Megan could feel his energy through the plastic, an alertness that prickled the air. The drive to the release site was short and tense, the road lined with pines that whispered under a wind that smelled like burning resin. The reserve gate was manned by a tired ranger who waved them through with a tight face. The light was fading fast, everything washed in that smoky amber dusk that makes distance look unreal. At the clearing, Dr. Hart kept his voice low. "No touching," he reminded Megan gently, as if he could see the instinct in her hands. "No lingering. We give them the gift of clean separation." Atlas wasn't supposed to be there, and yet there he was, standing a few yards back behind the truck, silent and solid as a statue. Megan didn't know if that was comfort or cruelty. They set Nova's crate down first. The latch clicked, sharp in the hush. For 1 second, nothing happened. And then Nova shot out like a shadow made of muscle. No backward glance, no hesitation, just the pure geometry of freedom. The brush swallowed her. The forest took her back. Rook's crate came next. Megan's palms went damp inside her gloves. Her mouth tasted like smoke and metal. Dr. Hart opened the latch and stepped away. Rook moved to the threshold, body low, ears forward, eyes bright in the dim. He could have gone. He should have gone. Instead, he froze, and Megan felt her heart seize, as if the whole world had paused with him. Behind her, Atlas exhaled. One deep, trembling breath, not a bark, not a whine, just a sound that carried years of guarding and the quiet weight of goodbye. Rook turned his head, not fully toward Megan, not fully toward Atlas, just enough to take them in, like a final reading of something he'd memorized. His tail gave one small twitch. Then, from the trees ahead, came a soft sound. Nova's voice, low and brief, a chuff that didn't beg or command, only called. Rook's body changed in an instant, as if a switch flipped. He flowed forward and vanished into the brush, swallowed by the same dark that had once terrified him. Megan stood there staring at an empty crate, the air cooler now, the smoke thicker, the silence louder than any noise. She didn't cry right away. She simply felt the absence settle into her ribs, heavy and undeniable, while Atlas kept watch over a doorway that no longer belonged to him. The first week after the release felt like living with a missing sound. Megan kept waking before dawn, expecting to hear tiny claws on the mudroom floor, then remembering there was only Atlas's steady breathing and the low, sleepy murmur of goats in the barn. The smoke cleared from the valley, but it left everything smelling faintly scorched, like a sweater that never quite loses the scent of last winter's fireplace. Megan did what adults do when they can't fix a feeling. She worked. She mended fence wire, checked water lines, and pretended the quiet didn't press against her ribs. On the 7th day, Dr. Hart called. His voice was softer than usual, like he didn't want to jinx what he was about to say. "We got footage." Megan drove to the rehab office under a sky the color of clean steel. In the small back room, the computer screen lit up with that greenish infrared glow. At first, it was just brush moving, a ripple of shadows. Then, Nova stepped into frame. Leaner, calmer, fully herself. A heartbeat later, Rook appeared behind. Her, not stumbling, not searching for people, but moving like a piece of the forest, shoulders rolling low, eyes cutting left and right with purpose. Megan's breath caught, warm relief flushing through her chest so fast it almost hurt. Then came the part that changed everything. The camera angle shifted to a different location, closer to Megan's fence line. The timestamp showed midnight. The wind hissed through pine needles like distant rain. Rook entered the frame alone, stopped at the edge of the pasture, and stared toward the house without stepping forward. Two pale shapes drifted in behind him. Great Pyrenees, huge and silent, pacing the inside of the fence. Atlas and June. They had slipped out of the barnyard like ghosts on patrol. Rook didn't cross. He didn't beg. He did not act like a habituated animal looking for a handout. Instead, he lowered his head and scraped the frozen ground 3 deliberate times, the dry grit loud in the microphone. Atlas snapped his head up instantly, body going rigid, a low warning breath rumbling from his chest. At the far edge of the frame, headlights bloomed, dim, cautious, then cut off. A truck rolled to a stop on the lower road. The driver door opened, and 2 figures moved with that careful, practiced speed that made Megan's skin crawl. Metal glinted. A chain gave a faint clink. Dr. Hart paused the video. "Rachel was right," he said quietly. "They were working this valley." Megan's mouth went dry. In her mind, she saw Dale Mercer's parked truck again, the glow of a phone screen, the way he'd watched too long. She thought of the ways people protect what they value: good fences, good locks, a dependable security camera system, and how none of it matters if danger is already in the dark. Atlas barked once in the footage, deep, booming, a sound that shakes the air. The figures froze. Rook slipped backward into the brush, disappearing as if he'd never existed. Atlas held the line. June paced. And then the screen filled with headlights, brighter now, and Officer Rachel Kim's voice carried faintly across the night as she called out, firm and controlled. The next morning, Rachel met Megan at the gate. Her cheeks were wind-chapped, her eyes tired, but there was something like satisfaction in her posture. "We got them," she said. "Illegal traps, clear evidence. You did the right thing calling. And that Bobcat of yours." She shook her head once, almost smiling. "He didn't come back because he needed you. He came back because he noticed what you couldn't." Weeks turned into seasons. Nova stayed wild. Rook stayed wilder. Megan never tried to touch him again, not once. She kept her distance the way love sometimes has to. Life moved on. Paperwork, repairs, farm liability, insurance renewals, the ordinary weight of keeping a property safe. Years later, Atlas grew slow and gray around the eyes. On a night when snow fell in a soft hush, Megan stepped onto the porch and saw a shape at the tree line. Rook, older now, still and watchful. He didn't approach. He simply looked toward Atlas, who stood beside Megan like a fading mountain, and for a long moment the world felt held in quiet hands. Then Rook turned, and two young bobcats flowed behind him like shadows on fresh snow. He led them away without hurry, back into the dark that had always been home, leaving Megan with a full, aching kind of peace. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Before you scroll away, tell me this. Do you believe a bond like theirs could really exist? If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just remind you that sometimes the wild loves us back in ways we'll never forget.